On the 11th of July, 1995, the Srebrenica massacre began, in which Serb armed forces went into the Bosniak town of Srebrenica and executed over 8,000 Muslim men and boys within 1 month. It was the deadliest massacre in Europe since World War II, and the first genocide in Europe since the Holocaust. The Srebrenica massacre was part of a larger campaign of ethnic cleansing by the Serbs in Bosnia. Bosnia was a multi-ethnic state, where 44% of the people were Muslim Bosniaks, 31% of the people were Bosnian Serbs, and 17% were Bosnian Croats. In 1992, the Serbs went to war with the Bosniaks and Croats. Each of the three ethnic groups formed their own army. During the war, the army of the Bosnian Serbs took control of 70% of Bosnia. About 800,000 Bosniaks and Croats lived in the parts of Bosnia captured by the Serbs. Within 3 years, the Bosnian Serbs forcibly expelled 90% of Bosniaks and Croats from this territory. This ethnic cleansing campaign caused almost 800,000 non-Serbs to flee their homes, and this area became purely ethnically Serbian. It was the largest ethnic cleansing in Europe since the end of World War II. The Bosnian War, which lasted from 1992 to 1995, resulted in 101,000 deaths, including 38,000 civilians. 4,000 Serb civilians were killed, along with 2,000 Croat civilians. Meanwhile, 31,000 Muslim Bosniak civilians were killed. Dozens of massacres against civilians were carried out during this war. The majority of these massacres were committed by Serb forces. During the war, 12,000 to 50,000 women were raped. The vast majority of rapes were perpetrated by Serb forces, and most of the victims were Bosniak women. Hundreds of Bosniak villages were also destroyed by the Serb forces. For 3 years, the Bosnian Serb army surrounded multiple Bosniak cities and towns, including Sarajevo, Gorazde, Žepa, and Srebrenica. Sarajevo was the capital city of Bosnia, and it was blockaded by the Serb forces, who blocked major roads, cut supplies of food and medicine, and cut off the city's water, electricity, and heating. It was the longest siege of a capital city in modern history. The Serb forces attacked Sarajevo with artillery and tanks, and hit the city with an average of 300 shells per day for more than 1,000 days. Over 5,000 civilians were killed in this siege, including 1,600 children. Another brutal siege occurred in Srebrenica. From 1992 to March 1993, the Serb forces indiscriminately shelled Srebrenica on a daily basis. By March 1993, there was almost no running water as the Serb forces had destroyed water supplies. Food was scarce and civilians were starving to death. In April 1993, the Bosnian Serbs threatened to attack Srebrenica unless the Bosniak forces surrendered within 2 days. When the Bosniaks refused, the Serbs shelled Srebrenica on April 12, 1993, killing 56 people, including 14 children on a school playground. The United Nations then declared Srebrenica to be a UN safe area that would be protected by UN peacekeeping forces to defend the civilian population from attacks. The UN sent just a few hundred soldiers to Srebrenica, who tried to guard the town for 2 years. By early 1995, the Serb forces were preventing UN access to the supply road. Humanitarian aid decreased and living conditions quickly deteriorated. Fewer and fewer supply convoys were making it through to the town. The UN forces started running low on food, medicine, ammunition, and fuel. In March 1995, Radovan Karadzic, the leader of the Bosnian Serbs, instructed the Serb forces to create an unbearable situation of total insecurity with no hope of further survival or life for the inhabitants of Srebrenica. Some Bosniak civilians then died from starvation. In May, the Bosnian Serbs attacked the safe area of Gorazde and took 33 UN peacekeepers as hostages. On July 6th, the Bosnian Serb army launched an attack against the UN-protected town of Srebrenica. On July 9th and 10th, the Serb forces relentlessly pounded the town with artillery, and they took 30 UN soldiers as hostages. On July 11th, NATO bombed the Serb forces who were attacking Srebrenica. The Bosnian Serbs threatened to kill the UN peacekeepers that they had taken hostage if the NATO bombing continued. NATO then ended its airstrikes. On the 11th of July, 1995, the Serb forces entered the town and the Srebrenica massacre began. Within 1 month, more than 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were executed by the Serb forces. The Serbs also deported 25,000 to 30,000 Bosniak women, children, and elderly people from Srebrenica. The UN peacekeeping force did not have enough soldiers or equipment to repel the Bosnian Serb army or to stop the massacre. When the Serbs took over the town, they separated the men and teenage boys from the rest of the population. Young boys and elderly men were deported along with the women and girls. The rest of the males in Srebrenica were prevented from leaving. The Serb forces detained thousands of Bosniak men and boys. These Bosniaks were then transported by bus or by truck to killing sites, such as fields, schools, and warehouses. At these killing sites, the Bosniaks would be ordered to line up in rows, and then they would be shot to death. Often they were ordered to surrender their belongings and valuables before their deaths. Serb soldiers often beat Bosniak detainees before killing them. The deadliest mass execution during the Srebrenica massacre took place at the Branjevo military farm. Here, 1,200 Muslim men and boys were executed within 1 day, on the 16th of July. The mass murder of 8,000 Bosniaks in Srebrenica was the largest massacre to occur in Europe since World War II. Later that month, the Bosnian Serb forces attacked the UN safe area of Žepa and seized control of it. Over 100 Bosniaks were then killed in the takeover. A month later, the Bosnian Serb army fired shells at a marketplace in Sarajevo, killing 43 people. 2 days later, NATO launched a bombing campaign against the Bosnian Serbs. Over 1,000 bombs were dropped, hitting 300 Serb targets. 2 weeks into the NATO bombing campaign, the Bosnian Serbs signed an agreement to withdraw their heavy weapons from Sarajevo. NATO then suspended its airstrikes. 2 months later, in November 1995, the Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks signed a peace treaty, ending the 3-year Bosnian War. The Serb, Muslim, and Croat areas of Bosnia were united into one single country. In 1993, a UN court called the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, was established to prosecute the war crimes that had been committed during the wars in Bosnia and Croatia, and to try the perpetrators. The court was located in The Hague. In 2004, the appeals chamber of the ICTY ruled that the 1995 Srebrenica massacre was a genocide. This ruling was upheld in 2007 by the International Court of Justice, which is the judicial branch of the United Nations. The leader of the Bosnian Serbs during the war was Radovan Karadzic. In 2016, the ICTY found Radovan Karadzic guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in Srebrenica, and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. In 2019, the sentence was increased to life in prison. Ratko Mladic was the commander of the Bosnian Serb army during the war. In 2017, the ICTY convicted Mladic of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. He was sentenced to life in prison. 3 other Bosnian Serbs were convicted of genocide and received life in prison, while 2 Serbs were convicted of aiding and abetting genocide and received 35 years in prison. The Srebrenica massacre was the first genocide to take place in Europe after World War II. Over 6,000 genocide victims have been identified through DNA analysis of human remains recovered from mass graves. These Bosniak Muslim victims have been buried at the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial Cemetery. In 2024, the United Nations designated July 11th as the International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the 1995 genocide in Srebrenica. 30 years after the genocide, Bosnia remains one single multi-ethnic country in relative peace, but where ethnic tensions are still high. The men responsible for the Srebrenica genocide are still alive, but are behind bars for the rest of their lives.